The cabin was already tense before anyone raised their voice. The plane cruised at altitude, the low hum of the engines blending with the soft clatter of cutlery and murmured conversations. Most passengers were settled into their seats, headphones on, screens glowing, eager for the flight to pass quietly. In row 14, the teen girl sat upright by the window, phone pressed gently to her ear. Her posture was calm, her expression focused, her voice low and controlled as she spoke. "Yes, I understand," she said quietly into the phone. "No, I'm on the plane already. I'll call you once we land." She wasn't loud, she wasn't disruptive, she wasn't bothering anyone, but she was noticed. The flight attendant had been watching her for several minutes from the aisle, arms folded tightly, jaw clenched, eyes fixed. She had already passed the girl's row twice without stopping, each time slowing slightly, as if waiting for an excuse. Finally, she stopped abruptly beside the seat. "End that call now," the attendant snapped. The girl looked up, startled, her eyes widening slightly. She pulled the phone away from her ear just enough to respond. "I'm almost done," she said calmly. "I'll hang up in a second." The attendant didn't lower her voice. "No," she said sharply. "You're done now. You're delaying the cabin." Several heads turned. Conversations faded. The hum of the plane suddenly felt louder. The girl glanced around, aware that attention had locked onto her. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the instinctive calculation of how to respond without making things worse. She had learned that instinct young. "I'm not delaying anything," she said, still calm. "I'm seated. I'm quiet." "That doesn't matter," the attendant replied. "Rules are rules." The girl nodded slowly and lifted the phone again. "I need 1 minute," she said into the call. "They're asking me to hang up." That was when the attendant lost her patience. "I said end it," she shouted. "Right now." The words shouted echoed through the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched intently, curiosity mixing with discomfort. The girl's hand tightened around the phone. She inhaled, steadying herself, then spoke clearly into the receiver. "I'll call you back. Something's happening." She ended the call and placed the phone on her lap, her hands folded neatly over it. She looked up at the attendant, her face composed but her eyes burning with quiet resolve. "There," she said. "It's over." The attendant crossed her arms. "Next time," she said coldly, "follow instructions the first time." Before the girl could respond, a man from the row across leaned forward slightly. "She wasn't being loud," he said carefully. "You didn't need to yell." The attendant shot him a glare. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." The girl felt heat rising in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. The familiar sting of being singled out, of being treated like a problem rather than a person. She took a breath. "It does concern me," she said, her voice steady. "Because you shouted at me when I wasn't doing anything wrong." The attendant scoffed. "I'm responsible for safety. If you can't comply, I did comply," the girl said, immediately. Silence settled over the room. The attendant seemed momentarily thrown off by the girl's composure. She hadn't expected resistance. She certainly hadn't expected confidence. Behind them, a man in a dark suit stood up slowly. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He adjusted his jacket and stepped into the aisle. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The attendant turned toward him, irritation flashing across her face. "Yes, this passenger refused to follow instructions." The man looked at the girl, then back at the attendant. "That's not what I observed." The attendant stiffened. "Sir, please return to your seat." "Keaton, I heard you shout at her," he said calmly. "I didn't hear her raise her voice once." The girl remained seated, heart pounding now, but her posture unchanged. She hadn't planned to escalate anything. She hadn't planned to call anyone important. She hadn't planned anything at all. She simply refused to be diminished. The attendant opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again as another passenger spoke up. "You were out of line," a woman near the aisle said quietly. She was on a phone call. "Lots of people are." A murmur rippled through the cabin, rement, unease. The balance of attention shifted. The attendant's face flushed. "I'm calling the captain," she snapped. "This behavior is unacceptable." She turned and stormed toward the front of the cabin. The girl exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled now, adrenaline finally catching up. She stared at her phone, resisting the urge to pick it back up. The man in the suit leaned closer. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yes, you handled that well. Thank you." Minutes passed. The tension didn't dissipate, it thickened. When the attendant returned, she wasn't alone. Another crew member walked beside her, expression unreadable. The first attendant pointed sharply, "Vassar." The second attendant looked at the girl, then at the surrounding passengers. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. She refused to follow a direct instruction and caused a disturbance, the first attendant said. The girl spoke before anyone else could have. "I was on a phone call," she said calmly. "I was asked to end it. I did, then I was shouted at." The second attendant studied her face carefully, then glanced at the passengers nearby. "Is that accurate?" she asked. Several people nodded. "Yes," someone said. "That's exactly what happened." Another added. The first attendant's confidence faltered. The second attendant sighed quietly. "I'll handle this," she said, her tone firm. She turned to the girl. "I'm sorry for how that was addressed," she said. "Thank you for complying." The girl nodded, her expression neutral. Then she picked up her phone again. Not to argue, not to provoke, to call back. She dialed quickly and lifted the phone to her ear. "I'm okay," she said softly. "Yes. No. It's handled." She paused, listening. Then her eyes lifted to meet the attendant's gaze as she added, quietly but clearly, "Yes, you can proceed." The attendant stiffened. "What did you say?" she asked. The girl lowered the phone slightly. "I said you can proceed." The man in the suit exhaled slowly. The second attendant looked confused. "Proceed with what?" The girl ended the call and placed the phone down. "My mother," she said evenly, "is the airline's regional compliance director." The cabin froze. The first attendant's face drained of color. The girl continued, her voice steady, unshaken. "She was on the line when you shouted at me. She heard everything." Silence spread like shockwaves through the rows. The second attendant's posture changed instantly. She began, then stopped. The girl didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply sat there, grounded, composed. "I didn't want this to become a scene," she said. "I just wanted to be treated with respect." The man in the suit nodded slowly. "So did the rest of us," someone murmured. The first attendant stepped back, eyes darting. The second attendant straightened. "We'll be documenting this," she said carefully. "Please remain seated." The girl nodded. For the rest of the flight, no one raised their voice. When the plane landed, the captain himself stood near the front. The girl was asked to wait before disembarking. She did so without complaint. Her mother was already waiting at the gate, not angry, not shouting, just watching. And for the first time since boarding, the girl allowed herself to breathe. Because sometimes justice didn't arrive through shouting. Sometimes it arrived through quiet strength, composure, and the refusal to shrink. And the entire cabin learned that day that authority, when misused, eventually answers to truth. The gate area was unusually quiet as the crew gathered near the counter. Passengers lingered nearby under the pretense of waiting for luggage, though many were clearly listening. The girl stood beside her mother now, close enough to feel the steadiness radiating from her presence. Her mother rested a hand lightly on her shoulder, not to shield her, but to ground her. The flight attendant who had shouted stood several steps away, eyes fixed on the floor. The confidence she had carried earlier was gone, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. The captain spoke in a low voice to the compliance manager, nodding occasionally, his expression tight with concern. "What matters most," the girl's mother said evenly, "is that this doesn't happen again. Not to my daughter. Not to anyone." The captain nodded. "Understood." The first attendant finally looked up. Her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. When she did speak, her voice was barely audible. "I didn't realize," she said. The girl met her gaze. "That's the problem," she replied. "You shouldn't have to." There was no anger in her tone, no satisfaction, just truth. The attendant swallowed hard. Security wasn't called. There was no spectacle, no raised voices. The situation deflated, not with drama, but with consequence. The attendant was escorted away for further review. The rest of the crew dispersed quietly, the earlier authority of their uniforms dimmed by the weight of what had occurred. As they walked through the terminal together, the girl felt the adrenaline finally ebb. Her legs felt heavy, her shoulders tight. She hadn't cried on the plane, she hadn't cried at the gate, but now, as they reached the parking structure, the tears came, suddenly, surprising her with their force. Her mother stopped and turned her gently, pulling her into a hug. "You did everything right," she said softly. "I didn't want it to turn into that," the girl whispered. "I know," her mother replied. "But you didn't cause it. You revealed it." That distinction settled slowly into the girl's chest. In the days that followed, the incident echoed outward in ways the girl hadn't anticipated. Internally, the airline launched a formal review. Externally, whispers moved through crew channels, through training rooms, through quiet conversations between attendants who replayed the scene in their minds and wondered what they would have done. Some felt defensive, others uncomfortable, many reflective. The girl returned to school the following week, trying to resume normalcy, but normal felt different now. Friends had heard fragments of the story. Some treated her with awe, others with awkward sympathy. A few avoided the topic altogether. One afternoon, a classmate asked her, "Weren't you scared?" She considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said, "but I was more scared of pretending it was okay." That answer stayed with her long after the conversation ended. At home, she replayed the moment the attendant had shouted. The sharpness of the command, the heat in her chest, the split second where she could have shrunk, apologized, complied without question. She recognized now how familiar that crossroads was. How many times she had seen others choose silence because it was safer. She realized then that courage wasn't loud. It didn't feel heroic. It felt like standing still when everything in you wanted to disappear. A few weeks later, she received an email forwarded by her mother. It was from a junior flight attendant who had been on a different flight that day but had heard about the incident through internal channels. "I wanted to thank you," the message read, "not because of who your mother is, but because of how you handled yourself. I've seen passengers spoken to that way before, and I've stayed quiet. I don't think I will anymore." The girl stared at the screen for a long moment. She typed back slowly, carefully. "I didn't know what I was doing," she wrote. "I just knew I didn't want to be treated like that. If it helps you speak up next time, that means something." She closed her laptop, feeling lighter. Months passed. The story faded from headlines, replaced by new controversies, new distractions, but its imprint remained in training sessions, in revised protocols, in moments of hesitation where certainty once ruled. The girl boarded another flight that summer, this time alone. As she handed over her boarding pass, the attendant smiled and welcomed her warmly. No pause, no scrutiny, just professionalism. As she walked down the aisle, she felt a flicker of something unexpected. Pride, not in having power, not in causing consequences, but in having trusted herself. Mid-flight, she noticed another teen a few rows up being corrected sharply for standing too early. The tone wasn't kind. The girl watched the exchange closely, heart beating faster. Before she could think herself out of it, she leaned slightly into the aisle. "She's just stretching," she said calmly. "We're still cruising." The attendant paused, recalibrated, then nodded. "You're right," she said, softer now. The teen mouthed a silent thank you. The girl sat back, pulse racing. She smiled to herself. Later, as the plane descended, she looked out the window at the clouds parting below. She understood now that moments like hers didn't end when the flight landed. They traveled forward, carried by those who witnessed them, altered by those who learned from them. She texted her mother when they touched down. "Landed safely. Proud of you, always," came the reply. The girl slipped her phone into her pocket and stood as the aisle cleared. She moved with the crowd, anonymous, unremarkable, just another passenger heading toward baggage claim. And yet, within her, something had shifted permanently. She knew now that respect wasn't something you waited for. It was something you stood in, quietly, firmly, without permission. And wherever she went next, she would carry that knowledge with her, unafraid to remain exactly where she belonged.